Today we hear the story of doubting Thomas. I remember growing up, this story used to illustrate Thomas's lack of faith and how we should avoid his bad example. We need to simply believe that Jesus Christ has risen. He's alive and well. To not believe in that doctrinal statement was a sign of apostasy, being a bad Christian. All Christians must proclaim the simple faith statement in the belief that Christ has overcome the dead and is risen. Well, today we see many variations of this blind faith practiced by many Christians during the COVID-19 crisis in America and even around the world. A handful of churches have remained open during the coronavirus pandemic, and pastors have urged their followers to proclaim that they are covered by the blood of Christ, and believing in that is enough for them to be immune to the virus. I feel that this parallels the simple belief that I was taught growing up, that the most important thing to do was to just have faith. It was no good to have any doubts like Thomas. You just need to believe and everything will be fine. Just have faith and it will all go away. The problem with you and how you are feeling is the result of not having enough faith. I think I, like you, have probably heard many of those statements uttered to us before at one point of time or another in our lives. While I don't have an issue myself proclaiming a simple doctrinal statement of faith, one can understand the potential problems arising out of simple blind faith. One doesn't have to look too hard to realize that expecting all Christians, particularly during this difficult time, to blindly believe that all will go well without taking necessary precautions because God is in charge is not only rather silly, but dangerous as well. In fact, I feel that simply having blind faith is something which goes against the essence of this gospel passage itself. You see, I think it was better for Thomas to have doubt. I think it is easier for him to have just hidden his insecurities and disappointment of not seeing the risen Christ like his fellow disciples. It was more difficult to be genuine about his heart's feelings, to be truthful about his doubts. I believe that Thomas's genuineness opened his heart and mind up to experience a God which is more real. A God not hidden beyond the facade of simple doctrinal beliefs and faith statements. It wasn't a blind following. And his asking to see and touch Jesus was probably why Jesus appeared again a week later and asked him to specifically carry out what he wanted. Not to only just see him, but to touch his wound by the side. Something in which the rest of his disciples did not get a chance to do. It is in this encounter with the real God that Thomas realizes the highest Christological confession of anyone in the Gospels. My Lord, my God, he proclaims. This confession was not a simple doctrinal one, but one which came out of a deep relationship of trust and friendship. It was an epiphany of sorts born out by a genuine want to experience the real Jesus. In addition, Jesus' reply to Thomas should not be seen as one of rebuke, but of blessing for those who come to experience the real God without having a physical flesh and blood encounter with Jesus. I see it as praise to those who continuously seek a genuine, deep encounter with Jesus without having a supernatural, miraculous encounter that so few have the chance to experience. But how can one encounter the real Jesus without having a supernatural Thomas experience? Well, that's where the earlier part of the gospel passage comes in. The part when Jesus appears to his disciples and he tells them that as the Father has sent me, so I have sent you. And that with the help of the Holy Spirit, if you forgive the sins of any, they are forgiven them. If you retain the sins of any, they are retained. The real encounter with Jesus can happen through you and me. We are like the disciples, empowered by the Holy Spirit to espouse the real Jesus. When Jesus then talks about the forgiveness of sin, he's not simply talking about morality, but about receiving the revelation of God through the person of Jesus. That is a commandment Jesus puts forth to his disciples, to reveal the God through the emulating of his teachings, to love our God with all our heart, mind, soul, and strength, and to love our neighbor as ourselves. If we reflect God through Jesus' teachings, people will encounter the real Jesus, forgiveness of sins. If we do not, they would not. They would not be forgiven of their sins. I heard from my friends back in my church in Singapore that there used to be a member of our congregation called Mary. That's not her real name, but for the sake of this story, let's just call her that. Before Mary came to my church in Singapore, she used to attend a large mega church in the country that's well known for preaching the simplicity of God's grace. Their message went something along the lines of this: God's grace is free. You can have God's grace and everything that He has promised you if you just believe. You just need to reach out and grasp it. It was a simple message that attracted the tens of thousands. Mary loved the message a lot and felt that she was worth it. She was worthy of God's grace. God was with her and everything good would happen so as long as she kept faith and believed that she is constantly receiving God's grace. But one day it seemed that she fell out of favor with God. Mary was diagnosed with stage 4 stomach cancer. She tried to believe. She prayed and she prayed, but the cancer did not go away. She approached her friends from her cell group. They said that they would pray for her. God will bless you, they said. Just pray harder and have more faith. It will all go away. Do not doubt. You will return back to normal. The months went on, and that was all she heard from her friends. Nothing changed. She was in and out of the hospital. She was in and out of chemotherapy sessions. Sadly, none of her friends visited her. All you need is faith, they would say to her in text messages. We will continue to pray for you. Don't worry. God is in control. She felt hopeless and lost. It was like the grace of God disappeared from her, the grace she held so central to her belief. She had so many doubts, but deep down, she subtly knew that God was with her and that Jesus would never leave her. Then one day, a friend of hers reached out to her and brought her to my church. As you know from some of my earlier sermons, that my church in Singapore, as a progressive and inclusive congregation who affirms the LGBT community, is not very well liked by mainstream churches in my country. Christians are very wary of us, and many saw us as heretics who did not have God's grace and favor. Yes, that's why there are so many LGBT people in the church. Nonetheless, Mary was surrounded by the company of the many gay men and lesbian women who were attending my church. These were the same gay and lesbian Christians who were shunned by the mainstream churches in the country. Every time she had a chemo session or was at the hospital, someone would accompany her. No one asked her to pray harder or that God will heal her completely. They just sat with her and stayed with her during the times that she needed them most. Sadly, Mary eventually succumbed to her cancer. But before she died, she told her friends that she never felt so close to God before. She never felt more loved in church before. She never felt alone and was always supported by someone. That was the grace of God, Mary would say. I finally know what it's like to encounter. Mary never gave up hope or lost faith despite her initial doubts, because she genuinely wanted to experience God. And Jesus answered not in the simple doctrinal statements of belief in grace, but through the incarnation of friends. The grace that Mary believed in was not provided in a simple belief in Jesus or the repeating of doctrinal statements in her previous megachurch. Grace and love were incarnate in her present gay and lesbian friends who accompanied her till her very end. They were responsible in emulating the real Jesus through their very small actions of just being with Mary in the hospital or at the chemo sessions, journeying with her in her most difficult times. In some way, Mary's friends gave her that Thomas moment during the last months of her life by taking Jesus' teachings to the fullest. They did so by emulating God's love through the love of their neighbor. I had a chance to encounter the real Jesus when I accompanied Trish in the hospital and at Carol's house before she passed. I could see that the real Jesus was very present with her all the time in the rooms that we were in. I felt that we and everyone who visited encountered the real Jesus through the love of the congregation of St. Luke's, who continued to stay with her till the very end. And Trish, she embraced it all. In fact, her resolve to live her life to the fullest in God's grace reflected the desire to get to know the real Jesus. And she knew it through all of you, her family in St. Luke's. These times that we are living in right now may be trying. The coronavirus has turned everything upside down. But let us continue to have resolve and the yearn to encounter the real Jesus, even if things don't look good or don't go our way, just as Mary and Trish did in their most trying times. Most importantly, let us remember God is incarnate in us through the Holy Spirit. I saw it in the love of St. Luke's. Let us fall back on the blessing that even in tough situations, we have each other and we can emulate the real Jesus so that those who need Jesus the most can encounter him through us.